I'd returned from work to meet my family seated in the living room, alongside Ace, who was beside Betty. I was quite taken aback when my dad asked me to sit on the sofa, which wasn't taken. I obeyed, my heart racing. "Well, Greg, your sister and her boyfriend complained to me about being uncomfortable in the house with you around them." "Huh? Betty, do I bother you? I haven't even spoken to you both since you arrived."
Well, with you here, the house feels crowded.
Crowded? Yes, it's crowded. You have only 3 days to leave this house, Greg. That's all. Moreover, you don't contribute anything in this house except the peanuts you give us as rent, whereas Ace is rich and helps take care of us. I couldn't close my mouth. I stared at them, feeling a mixture of hurt, betrayal, and sadness. They'd just treated me like a piece of dirt, like a stranger. Quietly, I stood up and walked out of the living room. In my room, I called a close friend I'd met at the restaurant. I was ashamed, but I had no choice. I explained things to him and asked if he could accommodate me until I could get my apartment. Fortunately, he agreed. That night, I packed my things and walked out of the house. My name's Gregory, but everyone calls me Greg. I mean, it's shorter and better. One night, I had a fight with my parents. Not a fight, literally, and not words exchanged either. It was basically just them speaking down on me, and of course, me taking it. I'd just finished college. In fact, my graduation was only the week before. I was in the living room, eating from the box of pizza my mom ordered, when she walked in with my dad. Together, they'd gone out for a friend's daughter's marriage. I welcomed them, but got no reply. Instead, they lashed out on me. "The girl who got married today is only 3 years older than you. She's the same age as her husband, and he already has a car and a house of his own."
I heard the lovely man is also planning to get her mother a house.
That night, they spoke a lot, and I ended up going to the bed, hungry and angry. They only saw me as a loser and will always look down on me. I couldn't sleep, not with my parents' words continuously ringing in my head. I had to speed up my search for a job. I needed to save up quickly and leave their house, since it was clearly what they wanted. However, I was wrong about that. I did get a job, 1 week later, at a huge restaurant. The pay was great. I was sure I would move out to a great apartment in the next 6 months. I also hoped my parents would stop harassing me when I finally told them about the job. They were on a 2-week vacation in the neighboring town, so I couldn't tell them about my job until they returned. When I finally did, the reply I got was totally unexpected and insanely shocking. "Well, since you have a job now, living here won't be free anymore." I could barely even remember to breathe. I looked at him intently, hoping he was only joking, but their expressions showed that they were dead-ass serious. "No, this is insane. How can you ask your child to pay rent for living in your house?" "No, this is ridiculous. The only ridiculous thing here is you barking over something that wouldn't have happened if you were smart enough to get an office job, which would have paid you better."
The amount you'll be paying as rent is $500 monthly. If you don't agree with it, then you can simply get out of this house.
I didn't have anywhere to go, so I couldn't leave. My pay was $1,500 monthly. They're asking to be given a quarter of it. I also had to feed myself and also fund my transportation. Without a choice, I agreed. They made me sign an agreement to add $10 after 1 day of delay. I continued working at the restaurant. The first month ended, and I received my pay. I paid rent to my parents and divided the rest. By the time I'd assigned a duty to each part, I barely had anything to save. My heart sank. How was I going to get myself an apartment? I didn't want to continue paying such a ridiculous amount to my parents. I did save up a little money, and I continued to do so every month. By the 4th month, I'd gathered a quarter of what I imagined to gather in 2 months. It didn't matter though. I was making progress. I knew that in another 4 months, I'd have achieved my goal. My parents had stopped letting me eat their food, even on days when I was free. If my mom cooked, she would only prepare the quantity she and my dad could finish. That meant more money for me to spend. Luckily, the restaurant allowed me to eat there, so I only had to spend on food on my off days and some nights when I returned from work. Soon, we progressed to barely saying anything to each other. I mean, I was never able to have long conversations with them, but even the short ones had gotten shorter. It hurt me that they only remembered my existence only when it was time to pay rent, but I didn't dwell on it. I thought things were going smoothly until my sister Betty showed up with her rugged boyfriend, Ace. They'd both been dating for 2 years. It was surprising when my parents let her go live with him when she was only 18. I'd last seen her on the day of her 19th birthday. Her boyfriend had thrown a lavish party for her. At the time when she left to live with him, he was quite a rich boy. I wondered what job he did, but I couldn't ask. My parents said he was better than I could ever be, so I simply kept my question to myself. My sister and her boyfriend had moved in with us. No one told me anything. Well, until the next day. I'd returned from work to meet my family seated in the living room, alongside Ace, who was beside Betty. I was quite taken aback when my dad asked me to sit on the sofa, which wasn't taken. I obeyed, my heart racing. "Well, Greg, your sister and her boyfriend complained to me about being uncomfortable in the house with you around them." "Huh? Betty, do I bother you? I haven't even spoken to you both since you arrived."
Well, with you here, the house feels crowded.
Crowded? Yes, it's crowded. You have only 3 days to leave this house, Greg. That's all. Moreover, you don't contribute anything in this house except the peanuts you give us as rent, whereas Ace is rich and helps take care of us. I couldn't close my mouth. I stared at them, feeling a mixture of hurt, betrayal, and sadness. They just treated me like a piece of dirt, like a stranger. Quietly, I stood up and walked out of the living room. In my room, I called a close friend I'd met at the restaurant. I was ashamed, but I had no choice. I explained things to him and asked if he could accommodate me until I could get my apartment. Fortunately, he agreed. That night, I packed my things and walked out of the house. My family ignored me as I walked away, and that was when I felt hot tears rolling down my cheeks. I began living with my friend. Together, we went to work and returned home. I wanted to pay the rent with him, but he refused. According to him, he knew I was struggling and couldn't add to it. I thanked him so much. When that month ended, I suddenly got a call from my parents.
When are you sending your rent in? It's already 1 day late, so you need to include the $10.
I burst into laughter. Ha ha ha. Rent? Have you forgotten you all sent me out? I won't be paying a dime to you anymore. She flared up, telling me I needed to continue paying because my sister was living with them. I refused to pay, telling her to ask Ace to pay, since he was rich enough.
Ace lost all his money to an investment. He was going to better our lives if it had worked out. You need to help them, Greg. They can't afford to pay for it.
I thought about it deeply. I didn't want to pay for it. My mind went back to a job vacancy someone told me about 3 days ago. I'm not sorry about it, but I can't pay their rent. Instead, I can help them get jobs. I'll contact someone and refer them to him. That's the only thing I can do. Goodbye. The vacancy I had in mind had already been taken, but 2 came out from my workplace. A waiter and a waitress were needed. I told Betty and Ace about it, and they got the jobs. Fast forward to 2 months later, my family held a party to celebrate my grandmother's birthday. Well, surprisingly, they invited me. I took an excuse from work and attended. However, when everyone gathered at the big table, my parents began talking down on me.
So what does Greg do now?
Before I could answer, my mom did.
Well, he works at a shitty restaurant as a cleaner. He's my son, but he's really lazy. We had to force him to get this job.
Honestly, I've never heard of a more stupid son. He doesn't even send us money. If we didn't have Betty, we would have died of hunger.
Oh, Dad. I do the little I can, since my elder brother has refused to take responsibility as the elder.
I felt so embarrassed, hearing them sit there and talk so descending about me. It was even worse when my cousins chimed in and began talking bad about me for being lazy and not taking care of my parents. Shut the hell up, all of you. How dare you? I work as a chef in one of the most popular restaurants in this city. I earn more money than nearly all of you here. I could see the shock on their faces. I turned to my parents. I bet you've both gone mad. Tell them how you both took $500 from me as rent for living in your house. Tell them how I got jobs for Betty and this asshole as waiters in my workplace. Tell everyone. Y'all sit here and shit-talk me like I'm nobody. I'm better than you all hypocrites. You can enjoy the rest of this stupid celebration. Goodbye. I stormed out of the room and headed straight to my friend's house. Betty and Ace didn't come to work the next day. I immediately put up a vacancy post, and we got their replacements barely 2 hours later. After 2 days, they finally showed up. They confronted me about my actions, and I asked them to get out before I did something crazy. However, before I could speak more, Betty suddenly slapped me. "Are you crazy?" A punch landed on my face from Ace, sending me to the floor. He pounced on me and began punching me. The restaurant owner and a few customers intervened, pulling him off and sending them out. I apologized to the owner and pleaded with him for a day off. He immediately agreed and also advised me to report them to the police. I did. With the bruises I sustained still fresh, I headed to the police station, and Betty and her boyfriend got arrested. My parents called to beg me to release them, but I refused and charged them to court. They were both found guilty of assault. Even more, it was discovered that Ace was a fraud and not the investor he claimed to be. That added to his jail term. While Betty got 2 years, he got 10, both with hard labor. My parents rained vile words on me for sending their daughter to jail, but I didn't care. It was needed. My friend was generous enough to help me with some money, and I was able to get myself a comfortable apartment. After a month, my parents suddenly called me.
Greg, dear, can you move back in? We're badly in need of money, and your rent will go a long way in helping us. You know Ace and your sister had been the ones supporting us, and now they are in jail, so we need money, please.
I couldn't believe my ears. They'd lost every sense of shame in them. Wow. It's sad how you're both still so shameless even until the end. I'll say this only once. I'm never coming back to that house, or even your lives. I do not want to have anything to do with you anymore. Consider yourselves parents of only a child who's in jail. If you ever try to contact me, I'll go as far as getting a restraining order on you both. Goodbye. I ended the call and even blocked their lines. They didn't know where I lived, so I was sure they wouldn't find me. I was going to focus on my life and make it better. A few months later, one evening while watching the news, I saw a picture of my father. Apparently, my parents had been so broke that they borrowed money from a loan shark and were unable to pay it back. This led to the gang kidnapping and torturing my dad. According to the news, the suspects were never caught. My mom had no choice but to sell their house to pay the debt to avoid any more kidnappings, leaving them very broke. When my dad was released, they ended up renting a tiny room with 2 other people who constantly drink and play loud music. I guess they are so depressed. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe and leave a comment down below saying I subscribed, and we will try our best to reply to your comment. On that day, the only people present were I and Gloria, her parents, and his teachers. In the middle of the funeral, however, someone suddenly burst into the cemetery. I turned and was shocked to see the manager. "Why are you here, sir? You must be stupid for asking me that. Did I give you the permission to leave your work to bury God knows whatever it is you're burying? How dare you say that about my son? Is the dead thing more important than your job? Huh, you idiot?" I was filled with rage and ordered him to leave, but he refused. "You're either going to stop this rubbish you're doing now and come with me, or be prepared to lose your job." In anger, I told him to do whatever he wanted. I told him to fire me if he wanted, and I didn't care. He still wasn't having it. He tried to grab my arm and lift me up, but I pushed him off. Everyone was in shock. When he punched me, all hell let loose. My father-in-law immediately contacted the police as I and some of the guys around pounced on him and began to beat him up mercilessly. By the time the police arrived, he already had a broken lips, nose, and other injuries. He was immediately arrested and taken away. Hello, I'm Thane Jason, and I'm 35 years of age. I lost my parents to the cold hands of death 15 years ago, and a few months after their death was when I met Gloria, my present wife. I hadn't finished college yet, and my job as a part-time waiter was barely able to completely foot my bills. Gloria's parents were very wealthy and kind-hearted people. When they heard from their daughter that I didn't have a good job or enough money to even take care of my school expenses, they spoke to me about wanting to help me further my education. I couldn't believe my ears. I was already making plans to drop out, as the load was too much on me. I felt like I was dreaming when they took my bank details and sent me the money to clear all school bills for the year, and also extra for my feeding. I was amazed. I thanked them non-stop. I eventually graduated from college, 3 years later, at age 23. By then, Gloria was in her final year. So once I was out, I began searching around for jobs. I wanted to get married to Gloria with my money. I also didn't want to work under her father or get the job from any of his friends. I searched around for 3 whole weeks before I finally got a job at a paper editing company. I passed the interview and got employed. The pay wasn't large, but it was comfortable. When I told Gloria about it, she was overjoyed. I worked at the company for over 5 years before I had to move again to a different company with a slightly higher pay. By the time I was 30, we already had a son aged 5. Jack was our world, and we both worked hard to give him whatever he wanted. He was born with a condition that made his brain develop slower than other kids, but we didn't mind. We were going to be patient with his slow development. One day, Jack needed to be taken to the hospital for his regular checkup. Gloria had to go to work very early, and it was impossible for me to skip my work. I called Gloria's parents, but they were both unavailable. Jack usually had severe back and head pains that needed to be avoided by injecting a special drug into him every 3 weeks. I knew if he didn't go to the hospital that day, our son's pain was going to affect the whole neighborhood. I didn't want that to happen. Quickly, I fetched my phone and called one of my closest work friends. He picked up and asked why I wasn't at our workplace yet. I explained the situation to him and begged him to help tell our boss that I was going to be a little late. He agreed and even asked me to take my time with Jack. I was grateful to him, and with a relieved heart, took my son to the clinic. After about 2 hours, I was on my way to my workplace. However, the scene I was met with wasn't what I'd expected.
How dare you, Thane? You've kept everyone at work standstill because of your absence, and you didn't even give a reason to be absent.
Shocked, I turned to my friend who I'd asked to help speak to my boss, and he looked away. Turning to my boss, I explained it all to him and also told him how I'd contacted my friend to speak to him, since no worker had his number. Well, long story short, both my friend and I were fired. Me, for obvious reasons, and my friends, for intentionally not telling my boss about it because he wanted me gone, thereby obstructing completion of work for the day. I was down and disappointed. For another whole year, I searched for jobs everywhere, but couldn't get one. Luckily for us, Gloria's job was good enough, so we were able to feed well with her money. In the middle of the second year, luck shined on me, and I got a job. It was as an assistant manager in an automobile company. I could have never imagined myself getting the job. I was shocked when I passed the interview so easily. On my way out of the building after the interview, the lady at the front desk stopped me.
Did you pass?
Yes, I did. I'm gonna be the new manager.
I see how happy you are. I hope that smile remains on your face in the coming weeks.
I didn't understand what she meant, but I thanked her and continued my way out. I broke the news to my wife and her parents, and they were equally elated. My father-in-law knew the company, as he was friends with the CEO. However, he said something quite worrisome to me.
I've heard about people quitting very quickly from the company. I have no idea about their reason, but I hope you last there. Congratulations, son.
Anyway, I shrugged any negative thoughts off. I wasn't going to let anything kill my excitement. The next week, I resumed working as the assistant manager of the company. It wasn't as stressful as I'd imagined. It seemed as though the manager was barely around, the reason for an assistant. I did my job as I should, for a week straight, hoping to meet the manager soon. Eventually, he showed up after a week and 3 days. He was a middle-aged man and always kept a frown on his face. When I met him and introduced myself to him, he waved me off dismissively and asked me to do my job and not try to get familiar with him.
I'm your boss. You mustn't try to top me, okay? Don't smile while I'm around and always bow to me.
His words sounded quite weird. I mean, I clearly wasn't trying to overpower him or anything. There was no point in trying to scare me off. Anyway, I played along and simply agreed to everything he said. In the next 2 weeks, I needed no one to tell me the reason the previous workers left. The man was a bully. Whenever we were having meetings, everyone was thrown into a state of panic. There would be visible sweat on their forehead. I could also see most quivering. Every time there was a meeting, he fired 1 or more people. Some for coming a minute late, some for breathing too loudly. One time, he even fired someone for coughing while he was speaking. Sir, it's quite hard to hold a cough. I don't think he would cough out loud if he could hold it in. Please, forgive him. I tried to beg on the young man's behalf, since he'd only started working at the company 2 days ago.
One more word from you, Thane, and you're going to get fired too.
I had no choice but to be silent. I wasn't ready to begin another round of job hunting. 2 months later, Jack suddenly fell sick. It was so bad that in a space of 2 weeks, it had rendered him crippled. My wife had to quit her job to stay at the hospital and look after him after he was admitted. Even though my heart was heavy with worry, I had to keep working. I couldn't afford to be jobless again. I had to be strong for my family. Jack's sickness got worse. No matter how the doctors tried, they just couldn't point out the exact thing that was going on with him. It even got to a point where he could no longer speak. My wife and I were devastated. Her parents took him to the best hospital, all of us hoping for him to get better as quickly as possible. A month later, I received even more devastating news.
I'm afraid we might have to start feeding him through a feeding tube.
Gloria cried all day. Slowly, our son got even worse. After 2 months of being in the hospital, he died. We lost Jack. I saw my whole world crumble in front of me. I cried my eyes out, but Gloria cried even more. There was no way we could be comforted. He was our only child, the light of our small world. Sadness filled our hearts. Gloria didn't want him going to the morgue. Even though she was in deep pain, she wanted him to be laid to rest quickly after suffering so much. I requested a 3-day leave from work to mourn and bury my son. I'd requested it from the CEO, as I knew the manager would likely not agree to it. The man granted me 2 weeks to have enough time to mourn my son. I was grateful. We quickly prepared his funeral. On that day, the only people present were I and Gloria, her parents, and his teachers. In the middle of the funeral, however, someone suddenly burst into the cemetery. I turned and was shocked to see the manager.
Why are you here, sir? You must be stupid for asking me that. Did I give you the permission to leave your work to bury God knows whatever it is you're burying?
How dare you say that about my son?
Is the dead thing more important than your job? Huh, you idiot.
I was filled with rage and ordered him to leave, but he refused.
You're either going to stop this rubbish you're doing now and come with me, or be prepared to lose your job.
In anger, I told him to do whatever he wanted. I told him to fire me if he wanted, and I didn't care. He still wasn't having it. He tried to grab my arm and lift me up, but I pushed him off. Everyone was in shock. When he punched me, all hell let loose. My father-in-law immediately contacted the police as I and some of the guys around pounced on him and began to beat him up mercilessly. By the time the police arrived, he already had a broken lips, nose, and other injuries. He was immediately arrested and taken away. After the funeral, I contacted the CEO and told him about the situation. I also called some of the workers. It was time to stop his evil behaviors toward us. Together with Gloria and her parents, we all gathered at the police station. After hearing what he did to me, what he'd done to the previous employees, and all he'd been doing to us workers, the CEO was shocked. I pressed charges against him for disrupting my son's funeral and hitting me. He was also charged with bullying and harassment of employees. He was fired and also sentenced to 15 years imprisonment. Also, he was made to compensate us monetarily. I completed my 2 weeks leave, comforting my wife and myself. Afterward, I resumed working. A new manager was also employed. However, I wasn't satisfied with the punishment the manager was receiving. After thinking deeply about a punishment that was best, I finally found one. Secretly, I paid some officers to get the bad guys in prison to gang up on him and give him a permanent injury. And it happened. He was beaten so badly that he ended up being paralyzed from his waist downward and had to be confined to a wheelchair. I was fortunate enough to receive evidence of him cheating on his family and videos of him bullying staff from an anonymous sender. I knew it would be an old worker, but I didn't bother to look into it. I posted all online and paid influencers to make it go viral. The CEO caught on that I was behind the posting, but he didn't care. He also thought the manager deserved it. I visited him in jail to show him all the bad comments people were making about him, and he was purely devastated. His family were ashamed of him and completely cut him off, leaving him all alone. I was satisfied afterward and moved on with my life. Gloria got pregnant after 1 year and birthed our daughter. We miss our son, but we're happy we finally have another child. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe and leave a comment down below saying I subscribed, and we will try our best to reply to your comment.
Well, it's Trevor's illness. It's back again. We need money for another treatment for him.
Why not use his college fund? It's clear that he won't need it now.
We did. After you left, we were forced to start working multiple jobs, and even with his college fund, we barely are able to make enough to pay all of our bills.
And how is that my problem? Because we're family and we really need you. Well, that's just it. You may need me, but I 100% do not need any of you. If you don't help us, we will disown you. And just like that, I turned and left. Hi there, my name is Kevin, and I may have done something a bit greedy and wrong, but the tragedy is that I don't even care. Let me explain what I mean, and then you can tell me if what I did was justified. You'll probably not agree that it was the right thing to do, but maybe you will agree that I had a good reason to do it. So my story starts back when I was a young boy. My older brother Trevor was a bit of a rotten kid. He would constantly get into fights at school and get awful grades, but our parents constantly just made excuses for him. Yeah, he stole from the grocery store, but boys will be boys. I'm sure he feels sorry for it. It didn't matter how much trouble he got into. My parents just thought that Trevor was the best kid in existence, even when he broke our neighbor's son's arm. They just made excuses for him and brushed it off.
Listen, my Trevor is a good boy. He would never attack someone unless they provoked him. Your son must have said or done something to deserve what happened to him.
It was so infuriating. They would treat him like everything that he did was right and that there was nothing that he could do that they would be upset with. Even when he stole their car when he was only 13, they still only made him promise not to do it again. And then 1 month later, when he did, only this time, he crashed the car into several of our neighbors' cars. For the first time in Trevor's life, our parents yelled at him, and they promised that he would pay for all the damage that he had done. However, the second they got him home, they apologized for their harsh words and didn't even ground him. They even lied to the neighbors and told them that he had paid for the damages even though they had eaten the bill themselves. It all changed, though, when Trevor got sick. At first, the doctors couldn't figure out what was causing his illness, but he was always tired and nauseous. It was so bad that even walking up a single flight of stairs was too much for him, and he could barely keep anything down. He began to lose a lot of weight, and he looked terrible. But suddenly, the doctors found a cure, but there was a catch. It would cost a lot of money, but my parents happily paid, and within a few months, Trevor was feeling like himself again. He even began to torment me again. Part of me was happy that he was doing better, but I really wished that he had used the experience to become a better person. Instead, it only made him feel even more untouchable. He even began stealing my things, like my iPad or my video games. Our parents always just told us to figure things out and that I needed to just let him be. After all, he had narrowly avoided death and that he just needed some space to figure things out. I was just so done with all their excuses. A couple years later, though, is when I really began to understand how toxic my family was, though. After seeing how much my brother had suffered, I had decided that I wanted to become a therapist. Part of me was fascinated how Trevor always managed to avoid accountability, and I wanted to help other people grow up to not be like him. At any rate, I told my parents my idea. So I have decided that I will be a therapist when I grow up. I know that it's expensive, but I'll be able to help lots of people. And I know that you've been saving money for Trevor and I to go to school, so that will help out a lot. Oh, well, you see, the thing is, we had to spend the money that we had been saving for your school on the procedure to save Trevor's life. Wait a minute, what?
Yeah, it was really expensive.
Well, I guess it was for a good reason. But when were you going to tell Trevor and I that we had no college funds? Oh, Trevor still has one. We only spent yours on his treatment. I could not believe what I was hearing. You spent mine, but not Trevor's.
Well, yeah, he has such amazing potential.
And what about me? Honestly, we just figured that you would end up working some dead-end minimum wage job, whereas Trevor is going to be somebody important one day. This is nonsense. Why can't you just split Trevor's college fund in two and we can share it? It will at least make college a lot more affordable.
Sorry, Kevin, but we can't do that to Trevor. That would be incredibly unfair to him.
Unfair to him? How is that not unfair to me? You basically stole my money, and you didn't even have the courage to tell me. I knew that it was useless to say anything else. And so I stormed off to my room and I started making plans for how I was going to still afford school. I had the grades, but paying for it was going to be a challenge. After making a budge, I got myself 2 part-time jobs, and I started working every shift that I could. It took a while, but I saved up enough that my first 2 years of school were paid for, and I applied and was accepted. I didn't even tell my parents that I was leaving for school. I merely packed up all my belongings and put most of my things in a storage locker while I brought what I needed to school. I wasn't the least bit surprised when they didn't contact me and ask where I was, or even if I was okay, which only made me realize that they were truly awful people and that I was better off without them in my life. It took quite a few years, but I graduated, and although I worked a lot of hours, I still ended up with a good chunk of student loans. But once I started working in my field, it was all worth it. Not to mention that I was making good money, and it wouldn't take too long for me to pay off my loans. Not long after I opened my own practice, did I get a call from my parents. How they had found I couldn't say, but they wanted to know if I could come over for dinner one night. Part of me was skeptical and more than a little suspicious about the whole thing, but considering how much I had accomplished and the years that had passed, I figured that it was time to at least see if we could mend the broken relationship that had grown from when I was younger. The night that I went over, my parents greeted me at the door. They looked terrible. Their eyes were sunken and they looked like they were ready to fall asleep at any second. Once they let me inside, Trevor greeted me next. He was sitting in a wheelchair and he also looked very sickly and weak.
Hey Kevin, so we heard that you were doing really well, that you have your own practice even.
Yeah, it took a lot of effort, but yes, I am doing well.
That's wonderful. We're very proud of you.
I would be lying if that didn't feel really good to hear. I had a feeling that there was an ulterior motive for asking me over, but for a brief moment, I was just happy that my family was proud of me. It didn't take long for them to ruin it, though.
So since you are doing so well, we were wondering if you could help us out.
Okay, here it comes. What is it?
Well, it's Trevor's illness. It's back again. We need money for another treatment for him.
Why not use his college fund? It's clear that he won't need it now.
We did. After you left, we were forced to start working multiple jobs, and even with his college fund, we barely are able to make enough to pay all of our bills.
And how is that my problem?
Because we're family and we really need you.
Well, that's just it. You may need me, but I 100% do not need any of you.
If you don't help us, we will disown you.
And just like that, I turned and left. It was no use in staying. Nothing had changed after all. As it turned out, they had indeed been forced to work crazy hours and use Trevor's college fund to pay for another round of treatment. After he had felt well again, he went for another joyride and had stolen a car and totaled it. The legal fees and fines were massive, and our parents once again paid for everything. Then when his illness returned yet again, they had to struggle to pay for his treatment. My parents ended up selling one of their cars and much of their belongings. Now they were desperate. They had nothing left to give up to cover the expense, and so they had turned to me. However, there was no way that I was going to give them a dime. After years of being treated like a burden to them, I had finally found a place in this world for me, and they wanted to take that away and help Trevor, who constantly just proved himself to be a menace to the world. After that day, my parents kept calling me constantly to beg for the money until I blocked their numbers. I had no interest in helping them, but as it turned out, they resorted to begging the community for the money and started a GoFundMe. It raised more than enough money for the treatment, and Trevor was once again healed. With the extra money, Trevor used it to buy drugs and prostitutes, and while he was celebrating, he drove our parents' car drunk and crashed it into a police cruiser and was then arrested. He is currently in prison and is serving a 10-year term, but something tells me that his illness will return, and he will no doubt either die in prison or he might be let out because of it. Either way, I doubt that the community will come to his rescue the next time that his illness returns. And honestly, I say good riddance. So there you have it. Do you think my denying my family was greedy, but at the very least that it was justified? Was I wrong not to help them out, even with knowing that by doing so, that I'm only enabling Trevor to continue to be a horrible person? Please let me know what you think in the comment section.
Yeah, cry. It's how dumb and guilty people defend themselves.
Get me the whip, Annabelle.
I panicked and turned to my mom for help, but she only asked my sister to be fast about it. That night, I was flogged like a criminal over my sister's words. I cried myself to sleep and woke up with a fever and swollen eyes. I asked if I could skip school for the day, but my sister made them refuse.
She doesn't have a fever. She's just shy about her boyfriend seeing her in such a condition. She knows she looks like shit.
That's true. You're going to school. Now get back to your room and get dressed.
I was born at quite a late age by my parents. At the time I was born, my mom was 42 and my dad 45. I had an older sister who was 15 then. You would think they'd have spoiled me so much and given me the whole world. Well, that didn't happen. My name's Angel. Growing up, I wasn't so bright. Now imagine a home where both parents are very smart academically, including their first child. And then, the second child comes in and shatters all their hopes for another smartass. That was how I was to my family. They were so obsessed with being academically brilliant and tried all they could to get me to their level, but nothing worked. By the time I got into junior high school, my sister was already rounding up with college. She was strict. She would drop me off at my school every morning and also pick me up. One would think it was fun, but it was hell. Our journey to my school every morning was filled with every sort of insult she could think about. She would hold my hand so tightly, knowing it hurt, but would never let go. Now, seeing how they were all treating me, one would think I was a pure dullard. But I wasn't. I was always among the top 5, but they expected me to always top my class like my elder sister. One time, during dinner, my parents and sister were having a conversation. She was telling them about how some students were offering to pay her to be taught. According to her, they were struggling with understanding their final classes and were desperate for her help.
Let's just hope Angel doesn't end like that someday. She's dull like them. I can't help but be worried now.
That would be so embarrassing for us. Ugh, God shouldn't have given me another child if he was going to bring a dumb one. I was okay with just Annabelle.
It's not my fault that I'm not as intelligent as you three, is it? Besides, I'm not that dull. I'm always among the top 5. Why are y'all acting like I'm a failure? I was only trying to defend myself, but it escalated so quickly that I was left shocked. My mother suddenly banged her hands on the table, causing me to flinch in fear.
How dare you talk back to us? Do you know how young you are compared to us 3? Have you lost your respect and senses?
Ignore her, Mom. She's being this way because she has a boyfriend now. You know how these kids grow wings when they start dating.
My eyes widened in shock and confusion. I didn't have a friend at school because I was too shy to speak to people. How could I suddenly have a boyfriend? What are you saying, Annabelle?
Oh, shut it! I caught you yesterday with that boy. You were both talking, and when you saw me, you quickly stopped talking to him.
I did recall having a conversation with a boy in my class who was only asking around for anyone who could help him with his tea fare. He'd forgotten to bring some money along and had no money to go home with. I told him I had nothing and looked away. Right at the same time, Annabelle appeared. That's a misunderstanding, Annabelle. He was asking everyone for some money. I told him I had none, and that's when you appeared.
Hear that, Mom? That's the excuse a dumb person would give if caught committing a crime.
My dad stood up, his nose flaring in anger. I knew I had to convince him that I was telling the truth, but there was no possible way. The thought of that and the fear of what he could do to me brought tears to my eyes.
Yeah, cry. It's how dumb and guilty people defend themselves.
Get me the whip, Annabelle.
I panicked and turned to my mom for help, but she only asked my sister to be fast about it. That night, I was flogged like a criminal over my sister's words. I cried myself to sleep and woke up with a fever and swollen eyes. I asked if I could skip school for the day, but my sister made them refuse.
She doesn't have a fever. She's just shy about her boyfriend seeing her in such a condition. She knows she looks like shit.
That's true. You're going to school. Now get back to your room and get dressed.
In pain, I headed back to my room where I sluggishly put my uniform on and prepared for school. She soon graduated from college and instantly got a job on first try at a big hospital. Of course, my parents were so proud and another round of comparison began.
Your sister got such a great job on her first try. I dare you, Angel. I dare you to not pass your first interview, too.
That was quite the dare. I had only started college, and the pressure of passing my first interview was already on me. I surely wasn't having the best life. My sister's job was going very smoothly. According to her, the pay was very huge and she occupied an important seat. In the 4th month of her working there, she bought a house for herself. I was shocked. 2 months later, she bought another house and gave it to my parents. Their joy knew no bounds. They boasted to their friends and other family members about their daughter buying 2 houses in 6 months of being a doctor. I was put under even more fire.
Do you see your sister? That's a good child. And there's you, struggling to even pass your exams. You're nothing but a mistake. I wished we didn't have you.
I wasn't hurt by their words anymore. I'd gotten used to being told I was an unwanted child. I simply focused on my studies, doing the best I could. I had a great passion for cooking and baking. My parents always said the only thing I was good at was cooking, and they wished a chef had birthed me instead of them. Yeah, in my case, the rare times I was complimented, a hurtful word had to follow. I was always watching cooking and baking videos and trying my best to recreate mine. The few I was able to do came out so well. In my 2nd year in college, I discovered a cooking academy that produced most of the great chefs I looked up to. They were hosting a class for another set of students. I badly wanted to get in. I couldn't ask my parents for money because my sister was in charge of their upkeep after stopping them from working. The only person I had was my sister. Although I was sure she wouldn't help me, I went to her. I was on my knees in her house, begging her in tears. When I first told her about it, she'd told me I'd need to do some things before she could help me. I agreed, desperately. She made me clean her house, do her laundry, cook, and even go grocery shopping for her. Afterward, I'd thought she'd give me the money, but she refused. I begged and begged, but all fell on deaf ears.
I can't let you be a chef. You're either going to work at a hospital or do nothing. Get out of my house.
I lay on the floor in tears and begged my sister with every pleading word I could think of, but she vehemently refused to help me. Even worse, she dragged me roughly on the floor to her door and kicked me out of her house. As she threw my purse at me, it landed on my eyebrow, causing me to scream out in pain, but that didn't affect her. She warned me to never step foot in her house again. The next day, the few friends I'd made in college were shocked to see my swollen eye. They asked what happened, and I explained to them. They felt so bad for me. Instantly, the 3 of them gathered the required amount and transferred it to my bank account. I was shocked and thanked them in tears.
We know how you support us with every blood you have in you, and we're aware of your passion for cooking. We're going to give you the same support no matter what it takes.
I was so emotional and grateful to them. After school, one of the girls took me to her dad's hospital for treatment. There, I was met with the shock of my life. I saw Annabelle. However, instead of being in a doctor's uniform, she was dressed as a cleaner. I asked a nurse there, and I was told that my sister was one of the cleaners. Now, if she's an ordinary cleaner, how does she get her money? My confusion was cleared when news reached us that my sister was arrested as part of those who sold fake drugs at the hospital. Added to that, she was also involved in the sale of marijuana and other hard drugs in a warehouse close to the hospital. That was where her money was. My parents were in despair. At the court, when I was asked if I believed that my sister was capable of such, I answered yes. As revenge, I went ahead to lie that my parents had caught her doing drugs when I was much younger. Yes, she deserved that. I also added that my parents knew what she was doing and hid it because they were getting money from her and were living in the house she bought them. My words didn't add to the evidence, but it was enough to prove that she was truly bad. My parents were ignored when they tried to counter what I said. My sister was given a 38-year jail term with hard labor. Her properties were all confiscated, leaving my old parents homeless. Of course, they disowned me for what I'd said, but I didn't bother. Even more, we got to know that my sister had bribed her way through school and wasn't as intelligent as we thought, and she also accepted to be a cleaner at the hospital because she wanted her first interview to land her a job. Since my parents were desperate to have her as a doctor, she took the job as it was at a hospital. Little wonder she never let them go to the hospital. My friends got me an apartment and even helped me find a part-time job. I was able to register at the academy and combined it with work and school. No family members accepted my parents in. Why? Well, I contacted the few who were still alive and reminded them of my parents being bad people who could do anything for money. I told them my parents asked me to start selling drugs too, so I can take care of them now that Annabelle is in jail. They disowned me because I refused. They felt pity for me. Two offered to take me in, but I refused and thanked them instead. My parents both got run over by a car and died at the spot after roaming the streets for 2 months. They were buried by the government because I refused being tagged as their child after I got disowned. I graduated as one of the best students in the cooking academy and was included in their viral cooking show. I worked there for a year before I opened my own restaurant. Surprisingly, it blew up so much in a year that I had to open another branch. I got myself a comfortable house. I visited my sister in her 5th year in jail when I'd become so rich and popular that I even had my own cooking academy and cooking show. It's fun to see my smartass sister sitting in this prison while I, the dumb one, is having my best life, enjoying freedom without fear.
I hate you so much, Angel.
Oh, I hate you even more, darling. I do hope you live your last days here.
33 years is nothing. I'll be out before you know it.
I laughed at her. Well, she believes she'll be out soon, but what she didn't know was I had paid an inmate to act like she had been severely injured and is going to accuse her of trying to murder her. Attempted murder is going to get her more years there. I'm not so cruel, am I?
I can't even look at him. He freaks me out. I'm sorry if this discomforts you both, but we can't go back to the house with him. Even worse, Freddie is afraid of how he looks. He can barely bring his friends home.
My grandparents were livid.
How can you say such in front of your son? Just because he has a disease doesn't make him scary.
I feel ashamed. How can you both be so selfish and heartless? He's your son just as much as Freddie is. If you leave him here today, I promise you, I will not allow you both have any rights over him.
We never wanted it. We're fine with Freddie. You can both keep the sick one. He might die soon anyway. Those itchy patches will drive him crazy. You can deal with it.
My name is Ollie, and I suffer from a skin condition called psoriasis. I was born with it, and apparently, my parents didn't like that. The disease caused red and scaly patches on my skin, giving me a rough look. My twin brother, Freddie, on the other hand, didn't have it. He was born with great skin and a more handsome face. He also had jet black curly hair, while I had ginger, straight, and thin hair. I envied my brother a lot. While growing up, my parents were very clear about who they loved the most among us. While they made me wear thick clothes that didn't show any skin, my brother was free to wear whatever he wanted. The thick clothes they made me wear caused irritation to my skin and made my condition even worse. When we were out, I would try to take in the discomfort and control myself until we were home. Sometimes I succeeded. Other times, I didn't. On days like that, I would burst into tears, begging them to take some of the clothes off. However, my parents would refuse and silence me. They didn't want anyone knowing about my condition, so they preferred to have me crying and in discomfort than to help me. It got to a point where they stopped taking me with them, as even my cries were embarrassing for them. Although it hurt to see them taking just my brother, I was relieved to be at home. My brother, on the other hand, rarely spoke to me. He'd requested to be in a different room around the time we were 6. According to him, he felt uncomfortable around me and had nightmares about me turning into a monster. Of course, my parents had us separated. Once we began sleeping in different rooms, my brother became a completely different person. He refused to speak to me and only did when he needed to warn me against getting closer to him. I tried to speak to him about his behavior and preach about love between siblings, but he was quick to shut me up. I'm not your brother. I can't be brothers with a monster like you. Don't you see how different we look? Truthfully, we were different. We had only a slight resemblance. Most people hardly believed we were twins. After failing to talk to him, I decided to back off completely. I was alone in my family. About the time when my twin and I were 9, my parents stopped me from eating with them in the dining room. According to their reason, Freddie was scared of my condition since it was getting worse. But it isn't contagious. I heard the doctor say that.
Well, your brother is scared and the only thing we can do is protect him. Honestly, I also don't believe the doctor's words. I can't have you infecting us with this.
I'd never felt so hurt and betrayed. I began eating in my room all alone. Even worse, they got me separate dishes and cutlery, as they didn't want me sharing theirs for fear of contracting my disease. It was enough that I was bullied at school for it, but it was unfair that even my family were doing the same. I was treated as though I had the worst disease ever. One afternoon, I was in my room when I heard someone enter the house. I'd been waiting for my parents, as I needed to tell them about some things I had to get at school. Once I heard the door open, I rushed out of my room. I knew I wouldn't be able to speak to them if they weren't in the living room, as I was prohibited from going into their room. However, on getting to the living room, instead of my parents, I met my brother with a young girl about our age, and 3 boys who had tough expressions on.
What the hell are you doing? Who asked you to come out?
I explained to him my reason for being in the living room, but he didn't believe.
I know you did this intentionally. You came out to embarrass me before my friends with your disease.
I couldn't believe him. How could he think I'd intentionally bring myself out to his friends? I mean, Freddie wasn't as smart as him, so I never expected him to be highly sensible. But I didn't think he'd be so dumb. He yelled at me and asked me to return to my room. I didn't argue. I immediately turned away and went back to my hole. It continued that way until I was 10, and my family decided that they'd had enough of me and needed me out of their lives. Firstly, they stopped me from going to school because my flare-ups had gotten worse. I thought they'd get me a home tutor, but they didn't do that. My education was paused indefinitely, and I was left alone at home every day while my parents went to work and my brother school. 2 months later, it was my and Freddie's birthday. I'd anticipated a little celebration since it was our 10th one, but I got disappointed. On our birthday, while I got locked in my room, a birthday party was held for my twin. I didn't get any wishes or even a cake from my parents. All I got was a bowl of cereal, and I was forgotten for the rest of the day until the next morning.
Make the house sparkling clean before we return home.
I was so pissed. How could they ignore me and still make me clean after the celebration? I would refuse, but I couldn't bring myself to disobey my mother. I cleaned everywhere like I'd been asked to, and quickly returned to my room afterward. About 3 months later, they took me with them to my grandparents. They hadn't seen me for a while, so they were shocked to see how bad my condition was. As they were offering ways to help me control it, my parents suddenly stood up.
We have to leave now. We didn't plan to stay for long.
I'd felt bad and wondered why they brought me if it was going to be so short. My grandparents were also vocal about not wanting me to leave soon. My parents' next words shocked me.
We're not going with him. We're leaving him here with you. We can't take care of him any longer.
I can't even look at him. He freaks me out. I'm sorry if this discomforts you both, but we can't go back to the house with him. Even worse, Freddie is afraid of how he looks. He can barely bring his friends home.
My grandparents were livid.
How can you say such in front of your son? Just because he has a disease doesn't make him scary.
I feel ashamed. How can you both be so selfish and heartless? He's your son just as much as Freddie is. If you leave him here today, I promise you, I will not allow you both have any rights over him.
We never wanted it. We're fine with Freddie. You can both keep the sick one. He might die soon anyway. Those itchy patches will drive him crazy. You can deal with it.
Not only was I hurt, my heart was completely shattered. How could my parents treat me so unfairly? As I watched them leave, I couldn't find any tears. My eyes ached, but I couldn't cry. My grandparents comforted me and assured me that I'd be fine with them. They did stick to their words. They took me to a good hospital where new drugs were administered to me. According to them, my situation hadn't gotten better, mostly because I had been taking cheap drugs that could barely do anything. Luckily, my grandparents were both wealthy and loved me. I was homeschooled for 1 year until my situation improved. The flare-ups had reduced, and my skin had become nearly clear due to the skincare routine I was following alongside my drugs. I was registered at a private school afterward, which was 1 year and 3 months later. All the while, my parents never checked on me. In fact, they moved to another city, according to what I heard from my grandparents. Time flew, and I was finally done with college. I was 23 then, and my grandparents had gotten older. My grandfather had a company. It was so popular, but I could see that it had the potential to be. I talked to him about my ideas, and he made me the vice president so I could bring the ideas to life. And I did. Barely 2 years later, the company's fame had skyrocketed. Unfortunately, my grandparents both died in their sleep after my 25th birthday. It was so heartbreaking for me, as they were the only family members I had. I ensured to give them a befitting funeral. My parents suddenly showed up one day after their funeral. They were demanding for the company. According to them, I didn't belong to the family, so I didn't deserve it. I argued that I was, since I was their son, but they refused.
We disowned you 15 years ago, so you aren't a part of our family. Leave the company to us.
I refused. I wasn't going to let them take the company I'd worked so hard for. Fortunately, while we were arguing, a man walked in and introduced himself as my grandfather's lawyer. He also revealed that my grandfather wrote his will. My parents immediately began dancing in excitement. We all sat down, and the lawyer began. It was very brief. Apparently, my grandfather had more properties than I thought, and also a fat bank account. And well, he willed 90% of his properties to me, and the other 10% to orphanages around. My parents couldn't believe their ears. They tried to argue, but the lawyer also provided a video of my grandfather saying it, so they were convinced that it wasn't a lie. They immediately went on their knees, begging me.
Your brother is in a critical condition. Help us, please.
It turned out that my brother had been living a very wayward life. He was a thief, a gambler, a liar, among other things. He'd gotten my parents in and out of jail several times. The last one that landed him in the hospital was worse. He'd broken into someone's house to steal, but a fire had started, and he got trapped in. Before he could be rescued, he'd gotten burnt severely. He was at a hospital and needed treatment immediately, but my parents had gone broke. They'd used their money in paying off several debts he owed. Before the fire incident, they were forced to sell their first house to pay a gang he'd gambled with, and with the remaining money, they'd gotten a smaller house. They'd planned to pay my brother's bill and move to a bigger house, but they got no inheritance. I had no plan to render any help to them. I chased them out, threatening to report them to the cops if they dared to show themselves before me again. That was the only way I could get back at them for abandoning me. The universe showed its back to them once again. By the time they reached home, they discovered that the community had burned their small house, alongside everything they had in it. Apparently, they'd found out that Freddie had accidentally caused the fire while he was trying to steal from the family. There was a candle on, and he'd kicked something that hit it. The only way to get back at him was to burn my parents' house. They cried their eyes out, but no one came to their aid. They had no one to turn to. My brother eventually passed away, and my parents were forced to get menial jobs where the pay could barely even feed them well. They slept in the streets, where they often got beaten by dangerous guys. Meanwhile, my psoriasis was continuously kept under control, and no one knew unless I told them. I got married a few years later and had 2 beautiful kids with my wife. As for my parents, well, I heard about their demise 2 weeks after it happened. They had been robbed and stabbed by some crazy gang members for a few dollars. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe and leave a comment down below saying I subscribed, and we will try our best to reply to your comment. Except when they took my check, they grew angry with me.
I can't believe how useless you are. It's been 4 weeks and you haven't made enough to cover your rent.
But you never said how much rent would be. Plus, I'm only 15. This is a good paying job for someone my age.
Well, it's not enough. You knew what I would do if you didn't live up to your end of the agreement. Now get out before I get our gun and shoot you and put you out of your misery.
Without even packing a bag, I ran out of the house as I knew that she wasn't just bluffing. Hi there, my name is Tyrone, and I just recently turned 28 years old. I have had a very interesting life so far, and I hope that my story perhaps motivates you to try to do great things with your life as well. To be honest, I wasn't always the most assertive or ambitious growing up. Part of it was my own fault, of course. But my parents never really did make me feel like I could do anything. In fact, they pretty much told me that they expected me to never amount to anything. When I was young, my parents would tell me that I was worthless, while my sister was considered to be the golden child. A big part of that attitude stemmed from my mother having a very controlling and abusive father, and as a result, she hated men with a passion. I never could understand how she managed to agree to marry my father, but the fact that he was extremely weak and submissive probably played a big role in it. She would boss him around and belittle him all the time, and he just took it without a word. Part of me felt sorry for him, but only a little. After all, He never stood up for me when my mother picked on me.
And what do you want?
Oh, hey Mom. I was just wondering if you and Dad would be interested in coming to my baseball game.
Why on earth would we?
Well, it would mean a lot to me. Please?
Of course not. Oh God. I wish we had given you up for adoption. When we saw that you were a boy, we were so disappointed.
She was always saying things like that. It hurt a lot, but by the time that I was 15, I had gotten used to it. My younger sister, however, was always being praised. They truly loved her. And it was all because she was a girl. They would give her gifts when she would get B's in school and say nothing when I got straight A's. I remember when I was learning how to drive a car. I was desperate to get some experience driving a car, and they absolutely refused to let me drive one of theirs. I was so worried that I would fail my driver's test because I hadn't gotten any experience, and so I did something incredibly stupid. I borrowed one of their cars and drove to the end of the street and back. Nothing was damaged, and I obeyed every law, but when they discovered that I had taken it without their permission, that was when things really took a nasty turn for the worst.
How dare you steal our car?
I didn't steal it. I just borrowed it because I needed to practice for my test.
No, you ungrateful piece of crap. You stole our car, and after all that we have done for you, we knew that you would probably end up as a delinquent.
Please, I'm really sorry. I'll give you gas money to pay for the gas I used. Please, I'm really sorry.
Not as sorry as you will be. Tomorrow, you are going to get a job, and you are going to start paying rent. And you fall behind on a single payment, then we're kicking you out of the house. Is that understood?
I nodded that I did, and agreed that I would get a job the next day, but my mother didn't wait to hear me. She started punching me, and I tried to raise my arms to protect myself. She began punching me.
I said, do you understand?
Yes, Mother, I understand. Please stop. She did stop, but she looked like she was going to start again at any second. Meanwhile, when I looked at my dad, he was smiling, almost as if he enjoyed watching me get hurt. The next day, I did try to do as my mother had commanded me, but at 15, it was hard to find a job that quickly. I applied at several restaurants around town. I wasn't very picky, and applied to any job that I saw. I didn't care if I was going to be a dishwasher, a busboy, or even a janitor. I just needed money. That day I went home and told my mom that I hadn't found anything. She grew enraged and started hitting me again. This time I didn't block her, and so she only punched me. It still stung a lot, but it wasn't as bad as her punching me. The day after that, though, was more of the same. I went out to find a job, but struck out and received a beating when I got home empty-handed. But finally, on the third day, I managed to find a job at a mom and pop home repair store. It wasn't a great paying job, but they were really nice people. That night, when I went home and told them that I had found a job, both my parents just sneered at me. They told me that I had better make enough money to cover my rent. They hadn't told me how much rent was, but I knew that it was going to be some crazy amount, and I could only hope that I would make enough to cover it. After my first week of work, I came home with my paycheck, and they demanded that I give it to them. I did, of course, and they took it and walked away. I had anticipated that they would demand a large portion of it, but I didn't think they would just take all of it. It was the same the next week and the week after that, and by the end of the month, I just assumed that they would take that last paycheck as well. I was effectively working as a slave for them at that point, except when they took my check, they grew angry with me.
I can't believe how useless you are. It's been 4 weeks and you haven't made enough to cover your rent.
But you never said how much rent would be. Plus, I'm only 15. This is a good paying job for someone my age.
Well, it's not enough. You knew what I would do if you didn't live up to your end of the agreement. Now get out before I get our gun and shoot you and put you out of your misery.
Without even packing a bag, I ran out of the house as I knew that she wasn't just bluffing. I really had nowhere to go, and so I just went and slept outside the hardware store where I worked. I figured, at least I would be on time for work in the morning, and then tomorrow afternoon I could maybe figure something out. In the morning, the owner found me and asked why I was sleeping on the sidewalk. When I told him, he was absolutely astonished and disheartened by what I had gone through.
Listen, I have a room upstairs. Why don't you live up there for now, but only if you keep going to school and getting good grades?
Well, you know how much I make. I can't give you much in the way of rent.
When I was your age, my parents had kicked me out too, but unlike you, I was a troublemaker.
My boss at the time took me and took care of me until I was an adult. I'm just going to do the same for you, in the interest of paying it forward. I couldn't believe how much my luck changed, and true to his word, the owner never charged me rent while I was in school, and he even helped me find scholarships so that I could attend college as well. I ended up going for electronics engineering, and after working at the hardware store, I had all kinds of interesting ideas for how to design power tools that would be cheaper but also more durable as well. After I graduated, I applied to a bank for a loan to start up my own business. And at first, the owner of the store that I used to work out was the only person that sold my products. But word of mouth got around stores all over the city, and then the country began to call me for orders. I had to take out another loan to purchase a factory that could satisfy the demand for my inventions. And before long, I had not only paid off my loans, but I had made a small fortune for myself as well. I was beginning to really make a name for myself, and people thought about power tools. My company was the first name that came to mind. It felt really good, after all. I had been told that I wouldn't amount to anything, and here I was proving them wrong. However, with success, my old family came looking for me, hoping that I would share my wealth with them. I was working at my main office when my secretary showed my old family in. They had made such a massive fuss that the secretary had agreed to let them see me, but she also made sure that security was ready to have them removed at the drop of a hat. My father pushed my mother into my office. She had had a stroke the previous year and lost the ability to talk and walk as well. My father had become her primary caregiver, and I could tell that it was exhausting for him as he had massive bags under his eyes. Even my sister looked a bit unwell and exhausted. I could see marks on her arms that looked like they were from heavy drug use. And what do you people want? Well, we heard about your success, and we think it's only right that you share the wealth of it with your family. And why on earth would I do that? You and Mother kicked me out all those years ago after stealing my money from me. Only because you stole the car. Yeah, that was irresponsible of me, but I was a kid. Kids make mistakes, but that didn't give you the right to make me homeless because I used your car and didn't earn enough, you kicked me out. I could have died on the streets. Well, you didn't, and you're rich now, so you can help us out. I leaned in real close to my mother, just so I was sure that she would hear me. I wouldn't help you if you were the last people on Earth. I'm glad that you are left weak as you are. Now your outsides match your insides, you petty evil woman. This fate is way too good for you. You are such a vile monster that I hope that you suffer even more before the devil takes you to hell. And with that, I signaled my security to remove them from my office and to never allow them entrance again. The look of anger on my mother's face made it all that much sweeter. In the coming months, I paid a visit to the man that I had worked for at the hardware store and saw that he was tired and needed to retire. I of course paid for him to live in a retirement home that was so swanky that he had his own butler, and his twilight years were some of the best years of his entire life. I made sure that if he ever wanted anything at all, that he would get it. He had helped me find my way in life, and I wanted to repay him fully. As for my parents, I found out that all the stress of constantly caring for my mother had caused my father to have a massive heart attack, and he died leaving my sister to care for my mother. She, however, had never done well in school and has resorted to becoming a prostitute to pay for her drug habit and for my mother. Unfortunately, she passed away from a drug overdose, leaving my mother all alone. The police asked if I would take care of her, and I refused, saying that she had disowned me many years ago. I'm not sure where she ended up, to be honest, but I can imagine that they put her in a group home run by the government. From what I hear about those places, I doubt that she is doing well, if she is still alive even. As for me, well, my company is doing great. I have several offers to expand my catalog, and in my personal life, I've recently met an amazing woman, and things are going really well. So things ended up working out in the end, I suppose. Do you think I was so harsh with my parents? Comment below your thoughts.
Why didn't you die in my stomach? Huh? I hate you so much. I don't want to keep on seeing you. If you do...
You see, that is my biological mother. Let me share my story. Hi, my name's Cherry Wilson. I'm 26 years old and live with my adoptive parents. They're the best things that ever happened to me, alongside my brothers. My real parents abandoned me 20 years ago, when I was only 6. Then I did expect to be abandoned. They'd threatened me with it countless times. My biological parents are people who don't believe that having female children was good. I was born after 2 years of their arranged marriage. My biological father's father was a wealthy man, same with my mom's father. They were both only children and already roped for marriage. To secure a partnership with them, they'd proposed marriage to their kids. Since they had no choice but to agree, they got married. Their parents wanted the house to be filled with male children. Both were demanding for a male, and my parents needed a son too. They believed a boy would make them proud. However, my birth shattered their hearts. Once, when I was 5 years of age, I overheard them arguing, and I was the center of it.
Well, I'm tired too. I never wanted a girl. I regret having her just as much as you do.
Then agree to my suggestion. We should put her up for adoption and pray for a boy.
We can't do that. People are going to talk. They'll tag us as the couple who couldn't birth a boy and ended up putting their daughter up for adoption.
Ah, I hate this. Where's that stupid child? Where the hell is she? Cherry.
Innocently, I walked up to her. My mother landed a resounding slap across my face.
Why didn't you die in my stomach, huh? I hate you so much. I don't want to keep on seeing you.
I was a smart child, so I understood what she meant. It wasn't the first time. I think I would have still understood because those words were like an anthem. Whenever she spoke to me like that, I couldn't help my tears. A month later, my mom fell pregnant. I got even worse treatment from them, as they strongly believed it would be a boy. The universe frowned upon me when the child was born, as he ended up being a boy. My little self panicked so much when my dad received the news through a phone call.
Get ready to leave our house. My wife has brought our real child to life.
Those words killed the child in me. I was left alone in the big house. The maids also regarded me as trash, so they barely paid attention to me. 2 days later, my mom returned home with the new baby. I tried to follow them in, but I was pushed roughly by my father.
Where do you think you're going? To touch my child? You're nothing to us. He's our only child, moron.
I was so young to be treated in that manner, but they didn't care. That night, together, they took me out of the house and threw me into the streets.
Leave our lives and never show your face.
I wish you would get kidnapped or killed. Fool.
I was just a child. I cried and begged, but they turned a deaf ear to me. When I grabbed my dad's legs, he pushed off roughly, causing me to hit my head on the floor. I passed out immediately. I woke up hours later in a strange room with a strange lady there. I couldn't speak. The lady lifted me up and fed me. I had bandages around my head and arm. After eating, I had the strength to speak. I asked who the lady was and where I was, and she explained that she found me unconscious, on her way back from work. She worked at an adoption agency and had no choice but to bring me there. Another lady also came into the room. They made me feel comfortable, and when I was better, they took me to join the other children. They did try to reach my biological parents, but they gave their full permission for me to be adopted. According to what I eavesdropped from the conversation, they told the workers that I was bad luck, and they didn't need me. It was a sad period for me. I was barely 7 years old, but my little brain could already understand a lot. The workers helped me as well, to forget it all and begin life afresh. By the time I was 7, my adoptive parents adopted me. They were the sweetest. It was hard for me to loosen up with parents again, as I suffered from the trauma of my real parents' behaviors, but they worked hard in getting me to see how much they loved me. My real parents never sent me to school, but my adoptive parents did. Even more, it was an expensive school. Their whole family never made me feel like I was adopted. Everyone loved me. However, 4 years later, at age 11, my adoptive parents had their first real child. It turned out to be a boy. When I heard the news from my grandmother, I went into a deep state of panic. I was used to being loved by them, so the news of them having a son of their own brought in a rush of emotions. I wasn't happy because I thought my time in their lives had ended. My real parents abandoned me after they had a son, and I thought they would do the same. My grandmother understood my fear and immediately began to comfort me. She assured me that I was part of the family and they would never let go of me for anything. It was hard to get me calm, but it eventually happened. On getting to the hospital, I broke down again, but my adoptive dad was there for me. They told me I was their first child and first daughter, and having a son would never change that.
We love you, Cherry. Do not be scared. We will never abandon you.
My adoptive mom also comforted me. I held my new brother in my hands, and I became even calmer. Life was good with a new member in the family. My family ensured to show us equal love. I also showered my brother with love. Our family got even happier. At age 16, in my final year in high school, my parents had another son. This time, I was even happier than them. I was overjoyed to have another member added to the family. I took care of the baby like he was my own son. The memories I was making with them covered the sad ones from my real parents. I barely even remembered them. I was in a better place. For my high school graduation, my parents got me a car. I couldn't believe my eyes.
This is to show you how much we love and appreciate your presence in our lives, Cherry.
Thank you for making things easy and even better for us. We love you, baby.
I burst into tears. My parents pulled me into a hug, whispering comforting words to me. My friends congratulated me. I was happy. I took exams for college and passed. My dad had started a chocolate company, so I went into business school to assist in handling it. My parents were proud of my decision.
I'd wanted to ask you, but I wanted you too to choose what you want.
You're so thoughtful, baby. Your dad and I are proud of you and grateful for you.
I was glad to have made that decision. I spent 5 years in business school. By the time I finished, my dad's company had grown even more. I began working immediately as the vice president. My younger brother was almost done with high school and had told me he was also going to join the business. I began to train him immediately. My other brother aspired to become a medical doctor, so he cared less about the business. Life was going smoothly for our family. 2 years into being a vice president, we opened a different branch, and my dad handed its management to me. I was immensely grateful and worked hard to make him proud. And I did. In just 1 year, my dad's products were the highest-selling chocolate. One day, I got a private call from an unknown number. I was hesitant to answer the call. However, when the caller persisted, I was forced to answer. Hello? Cherry on the line. How may I help you?
Cherry, my daughter, it's your mom, darling.
I was confused. Why would my mom call me with an unknown number? Also, her voice sounded different and strangely familiar. I knew that caller wasn't my adoptive mom. There was only one other mother I had, my biological mother. I was furious. How dare you call me your child? Have you no shame? Why the hell did you call me? How on earth did you even get my private number?
It doesn't matter, Cherry. I need your help. Your father died 6 years ago, and his family sent your brother and me out. My family took me in, but they sent me out last year because their company went bankrupt. We can barely feed, Cherry. Your brother doesn't even go to college anymore, and no one is willing to employ a dropout. Help us, Cherry.
Her audacity was shocking. I couldn't believe how shameless she was. After destroying my childhood, how did she get the courage to call me again? I ended the call without saying a word, as I knew I would say a lot of hurtful things to her if I spoke. She continued calling nonstop, but I refused to pick. During dinner with my family, her calls still kept coming in.
Pick up your call, baby. Why are you ignoring it?
I was hesitant to tell her the truth of who it was, but I eventually did. I don't know how she got my number, but isn't she so shameless?
Answer her, darling. Help her out this once. You're good, unlike her.
It took 3 days, but they finally managed to convince me. I finally answered the call. I got her bank details and wired a large sum of money to her. Don't ever call me again. I don't want to have anything to do with you. I'd thought it would end there, but a month later, she called again.
I gave birth to you. You can't just abandon me. Send us more money. Your brother's school took more than half of the one you sent.
Send us some money, Cherry. I'm a man, and I'm going to be better than you in the future. I might remember to help you then.
That was it for me. I lashed out at them very disrespectfully and told them to never call me again. However, they didn't stop until I was forced to abandon the phone. A week later, they showed up at the company. She caused so much trouble, telling everyone that my adoptive parents kidnapped her child. I couldn't tolerate her behavior. I contacted the cops immediately. They were both arrested. I sued them for harassment and also defaming my adoptive mother by calling her a kidnapper. The court asked if I would accept a fine, and I agreed. My mother was fined with $8,000 instead of serving a 2-year jail term, and my brother was fined $5,000 for being an accomplice. I was satisfied, as I knew they would find it hard to pay back. The court gave them a period of 3 months to pay, or they'd both serve 3 years each with hard labor. My adoptive parents supported me, as they weren't in support of my mother's actions. Of course, my mother and brother weren't able to pay up after 3 months, so they borrowed from a biker gang to pay. I hear they are now on the run, as the biker gang is, after their lives, because they owe them a huge amount, so they change states every time and are depressed. It isn't enough punishment for their actions, but I was satisfied. It would have been even better if my father was alive to get his punishment. I learned he died after a fatal and gory accident. I guess the universe gave him his punishment. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe and leave a comment down below saying I subscribed, and we will try our best to reply to your comment.
The occasional slapping turned into the occasional punch. It finally came to a head when my father came home one night and gave me an ultimatum.
Okay, enough is enough. Chad, you are either going to contribute to this family, or you will no longer be welcome in this house.
What do you mean, Dad?
I need a car, so you have 2 choices. You can either go out and steal one for me, or you can go out and live on the street and never return. If you return here without a car, then I'll kill you. Do you understand me?
Hi there, my name is Chad, and I have a really great story to tell you. It didn't start off great though, but I promise you that it has a happy ending. To start with, let me just say that my parents are just about the worst people you can imagine. There are probably worse people out there in the world, but I had the misfortune of being born into their family. I was the youngest of 3 children. My older brother Jack and older sister Deborah were just like my parents. Growing up, literally everyone in the family would pick on me. When I was only 6, I learned to never ask my family for anything. Hey Dad, can we get a dog?
A dog? What makes you think that I would buy you a dog? I don't even want to pay for your food. Why would I pay for a dog's food as well?
What an absolute idiot. With what money are you going to pay for it?
Money? I don't have any money. I thought maybe Mom and Dad would pay for it.
You selfish little brat. I really wish your mother hadn't given birth to you.
My father then smacked the back of my head hard enough that it made me fall over. For a few seconds I saw stars, while Deborah just stood there and laughed at me. Once I regained my senses, she then sucker punched me in the stomach and began laughing again before walking away. I was so confused, but I knew from a young age that my family was cruel, and for no better reason than because they thought it was fun. On top of that, both my parents constantly would break the law, but never anything that would get them into a lot of trouble. For instance, my mother would regularly shoplift. She would even have my brother and sister act as a distraction so that people wouldn't notice her put things into her purse. Sometimes it would be stuff we would need, but not always. As for my dad, he would sometimes go into crowded areas and would pickpocket, sometimes making hundreds of dollars in a couple hours. He would often bring my brother and sister with him as well, when he did for the same reason as my mother. The two would make a scene, and people would stare at them, not knowing that they were being robbed while they were looking at my siblings.
Why doesn't Chad ever come and help us when we go out, Dad?
That's because he is incredibly useless, unlike the rest of us. He's too good to break the law. The only time I ever tried to use him to distract people, he immediately started crying and gave up before I could get a single wallet.
Well, I'm sorry, but I happen to think stealing is wrong. I guess I was just born into the wrong family.
You're damn right you were. You are such a disappointment. I never thought that one of my own children could be such a complete loser.
Their words hurt even more than the physical abuse that they would throw my way. Sometimes it would just be a slap, but other times it was worse. Everyone in family other than me smoked, and they would put out their lit cigarettes on my arm. To this day, I have scars on my arms from all the burn marks from them. The older I got, the worse they would lash out at me as well. The occasional slapping turned into the occasional punch. It finally came to a head when my father came home one night and gave me an ultimatum.
Okay, enough is enough. Chad, you are either going to contribute to this family, or you will no longer be welcome in this house.
What do you mean, Dad?
I need a car, so you have 2 choices. You can either go out and steal one for me, or you can go out and live on the street and never return. If you return here without a car, then I'll kill you. Do you understand me?
I nodded. but I knew that there was no way that I could do as he was instructing me. I didn't know how to steal a car, let alone did I even want to, but living on the street. I was only 16 when he gave me this ultimatum, and the idea of living alone on the street made my heart race so much, I thought it was going to burst out of my chest. I walked out the front door knowing that there was no way that I could go through with it. I walked down the street and hid behind some bushes and waited until 9 a.m. the next day, when the rest of my family left the house to go somewhere. While they were gone, I snuck in and grabbed as much of my belongings and some camping gear that I could carry and left again before they got back. I really had no idea what to do, but I had the camping gear, and so I went out to a local forest and found a secluded spot and made a cozy campsite. In the morning, I went fishing and I was able to catch a few fish to eat, so I was at least not starving. I lived like that for a couple weeks when one day, I came back to camp after fishing and found a man sitting by my tent. He had noticed that I had been living in the woods for some time and he asked if I needed help. At first, I was reluctant to admit the truth, but after a few minutes of talking, I told him my life story. As it turned out, he had grown up in a similar home and he had escaped it and eventually became a park ranger. He was living in a cabin not far away, and there was an empty cabin next to his, and I could live there if I wanted. But the deal was that I would keep going to school. I couldn't believe my good luck, and so I accepted. From then on, Carl, the park ranger that helped me, would give me groceries once a week and some money to help me out, and although he would check up on me, he also gave me a lot of freedom. It was great. I was living in the woods still, and got to enjoy nature while also continuing my education. Eventually, I graduated high school, and with Carl's help, I applied to various schools for geology. I managed to get some scholarships and graduated at the top of my class. With my newfound knowledge of geology, I returned home to my cabin and spoke with Carl. He told me about some parcel of land far to the north that was being sold for a very low price, and he wondered if I could have a look at it. He was interested in making an investment and buying it, but wanted to know if it was worth doing so. And so I went and had a look, and sure enough, I knew that it would be a perfect place for a gold mine, and I told Carl as much. He ended up buying the parcel and hired me on as his partner and opened up a mine there. Within weeks, we were finding tons of gold and making more money than we knew what to do with. Carl ended up retiring from his job, and both of us built massive cabins along a lake that we loved. From that point on, we would scout other sites and continue to build our empire. Life was good, but of course my parents and siblings eventually found out that rather than dying on the streets that I had, instead made something of myself, and my father called me.
Hey there, bud. So I heard that you ended up becoming rich.
Yeah, I'm doing pretty good for myself. What do you want?
Well, we're family. I would assume that you were going to share your wealth with the rest of us. Or are we going to have to come out to that pretty cabin of yours and just take what you owe us?
How do you know where I live?
Are you kidding me? We've known for a while. Listen, if you know what's good for you, then you'll just give us our share. Otherwise, we'll come over and beat it out of you.
If you come out here, then I'll make sure that you'll regret it. I knew that they were going to be idiots and try to break into my house, but I lived in the woods, and people were the least of my concerns. I had quite the security system along with animal traps surrounding my property. The next night, I heard a howl coming from the woods which sounded like someone crying out in pain. I grabbed my rifle and went to see who it was, and as I approached, I saw that my brother had stepped in a bear trap. The rest of my family had managed to free him, but his leg was all torn up. Without hesitation, I called the police and told them I had 4 people on my property that were trying to attack my home. Hey, I called the police and they'll be here soon. You can either try to flee or get arrested. It's your choice.
Are you threatening us?
You're damn right I am. You people are crazy and dangerous. I don't want you anywhere near me. The sounds of police sirens could suddenly be heard, and my family scattered into the woods as they tried to run away. My brother with his wounded leg barely got very far, and was caught first while the rest ran straight through an area that was covered in poison oak and ended up getting covered with it. My father was the worst. He tried to fight back against the police, and they were forced to tase him. After that night, my family was arrested and were charged with assault, since all 4 of them resisted arrest. They all ended up getting scars from the poison oak that they were covered with, since none of them received any kind of treatment for it until well after they were scratching themselves raw. My brother got it the worst though, and his leg became infected, and he ended up having to get it amputated, in order to ensure that my family faced as much punishment as possible. I went down to the police station and told them all about how my family had been breaking the law for years. With my testimony, the police were able to build a case against all 4 of my family members. The police had dozens of cases with no suspects, but, with my help, they were able to determine that my family were guilty of quite a bit. By the time they went to trial, each of them was looking at over 20 years behind bars because of all the different crimes that they had committed. Shortly after the trials, a news station contacted me about what had happened, and I told them my story. And they put it on the news nationwide, and it got so much attention that a movie studio wanted to turn my life story into a movie. As a result, I ended up selling the story of my life for a hefty sum of money. And when the movie came out, my family was roasted by people online. Everyone around the country knew just what kind of monsters my family were, and I knew that even when they eventually got out of prison, that they would be forced to leave the country, or else be attacked and harassed by all the people that had seen the movie. For me, it was great. Not only had I escaped their terrible influence and toxicity, but now I also had a way of making sure that they would never bother me again. It was even better than a restraining order, although I did get one of those as well. So, in the end, I think things worked out pretty well for me and my family got what they deserved. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe and leave a comment down below saying I subscribed, and we will try our best to reply to your comment. I innocently got the money from him, and as he made me promise, I kept my mouth closed. It wasn't until about a month later that my parents confronted me. "I've been robbed, and I presume it's you. Give it to me or I'll call the cops on you." I didn't understand what was going on. I asked a few questions and vehemently tried to prove my innocence. My brother pretended to be on my side and even suggested I let them search my room to prove my innocence. I didn't know it was a trap and fell for it. They found the money he'd given to me. I tried to explain where the money came from, but it was too late.
I'm ashamed of you. How could you?
"No child of mine has ever been a thief and never will." With that, Dad ordered me to pack my things and leave. My brother feigned innocence and joined in the accusations and sermon of how I've disappointed the family. I was lucky they didn't call the cops on me at least. I was told to never return as I walked out through the gate. I'm Seth, and my whole family is against me. I know what you must be thinking. Seth is a bad boy who gets into mischief and commits all sorts of atrocities and drags the family name into the mud, because why else would everyone hate him so much? Newsflash. You're wrong. On the contrary, I was a very quiet person, and what I'll call a perfect introvert. My parents didn't seem to notice that though, and thought sending me to a film academy was the best career path for me. I resisted the idea with all I had, and that was when the whole problem began. You see, my parents felt they had the right to choose our careers. My elder brother, for instance, was forced into studying accounting, even though he was creative and could have thrived more in sciences. I was a talented artist, and so decided to follow my dream when it was my turn. I'm sorry, but I love art. I can't go to a film academy. I'm too shy for something like that. I don't even love it. Somehow, my parents refused to let me go to college and study art. I was made to forfeit going to college that year. I believe they thought that it would break me and give them control, but they were in for the shock of their life when I insisted the next year. It made my parents lose every affection they had for me. My elder brother read the situation and took advantage of it. He went around breaking valuables in the house just so he could land me in trouble with my parents who knew, but always sided with him nonetheless. We had security cameras everywhere, so I know what I'm saying when I mentioned that they knew the truth, but always took sides with him. On one occasion, he swiped one of Dad's car keys and took a car out only to return with the car wrecked. At the time, I was yet to own a license, and in fact, hadn't even learned how to drive a car yet. But somehow, my parents directed all the blame at me. "I keep warning you against taking my stuff, and now look what you've done." "But Dad, I can't even drive."
Exactly. If you could, you wouldn't crash the car this bad. Makes me wonder why you decided to try today. Just how dumb are you?
No matter what I said to defend myself, my parents insisted I was the one who crashed the car. Money wasn't a problem for us, but Dad shocked me when he asked me to fix the car. I had some money in my savings, but not enough to sort out such expenses, and even if I did, I wasn't ready to pay for my brother's crimes. I told my parents I didn't have the money, and I was given a week to either sort out my problem or face dire consequences. On the last day, my brother was gifted a car, the exact model as the one he'd totaled. The dire consequence? I was told I'd blown my chance of getting sponsored in college for life. I challenged myself and decided to apply for college in my choice field. I was offered admission, and I wholly believed my parents' threat to be a bluff. But no matter how much I cried and begged, they told me there was no going back on their words. My brother, at the time, had graduated and had secured a role in our family business. He offered to help me and promised to give me some money, but made me swear never to tell our parents. I innocently got the money from him, and as he made me promise, I kept my mouth closed. It wasn't until about a month later that my parents confronted me. "I've been robbed, and I presume it's you. Give it to me or I'll call the cops on you." I didn't understand what was going on. I asked a few questions and vehemently tried to prove my innocence. My brother pretended to be on my side and even suggested I let them search my room to prove my innocence. I didn't know it was a trap and fell for it. They found the money he'd given to me. I tried to explain where the money came from, but it was too late.
I'm ashamed of you. How could you?
No child of mine has ever been a thief and never will. With that, Dad ordered me to pack my things and leave. My brother feigned innocence and joined in the accusations and sermon of how I've disappointed the family. I was lucky they didn't call the cops on me at least. I was told to never return as I walked out through the gate. I moved in with one of my closest friends and told him about everything that had happened. He advised me to keep up with my art and introduced me to a project. I managed to make a few paintings and sold them, however at low prices. It proved to be enough for me to live on, though. I had forgotten about. My friend told me about a new project he'd invested in and asked me to follow suit. After much persuasion, I gave in to him and invested the little money I'd made from selling my work. About 3 years after I'd invested in the project that was sold to me by my friend, the project grew far beyond expectations and I raked in a good fortune. It proved to be enough for me to resign from my job and set up my own business. Life was going perfectly well for me until I received a call one day from none other than my brother. He asked me to fly in urgently and mentioned it being something about our parents. I asked him what it was, but he ended the call almost immediately. Something within me wanted to ignore his request, but then I was eager to know what was happening. And so, the next day, I got to the airport and took a flight that was homebound. I arrived home to meet my parents and my brother, both in good health, and wondered why I was called. Okay, I'm here. So what was so important that I had to rush home? It is about your sister-in-law. What about her? I wasn't even aware that my brother had gotten married, but I didn't care, and so I ignored that part. I wasn't surprised I wasn't given an invitation either, because after all, there was no way I could have honored it. That I was sure of. I asked what happened and almost broke into laughter when I was told. She is demanding a divorce. Oh, why? I was told that she had a few problems with my brother that were known to no one but her. She had just woken up one morning and decided that she was fed up with the marriage, and worse, she was pregnant at the time. I asked them how it concerned me and was surprised by what they said.
If the divorce goes through, she will take over his business and a portion of our family's business too, because we'd gotten into some sort of consolidation and amalgamation. Also, we'll never get to see our grandkids and children respectively. Please, you have to help us. If we commit all the rights of ownership to you, there'll be nothing for her except maybe a few other assets. You need to help us, please. After all, it's your business too. The family business belongs to you too.
Hold on for a sec. So, I'm supposed to believe that my supposed sister-in-law, or should I rather say, soon-to-be ex-sister-in-law woke up one morning and asked for a divorce for no reason, and you're all scared because she'll win the case? Exactly. You know it's a woman's world. That girl, she wants to take everything away from us. I knew that there was an important detail that was being kept away from me. I demanded that they fill me in on all the facts, but they refused, and instead insisted that it was just as they said. I'm a bit inclined to help them, but then I knew agreeing to their deal would make me an accomplice into whatever it was they'd gotten themselves into, and I wasn't eager to be a part of it. Besides, they'd signed off a deal to merge the two companies together without bothering to get me involved. So why was I supposed to bother myself over them when they got into trouble? I asked them to give me 3 days to think things over, but made sure I called them the next day. Hello, how's everything going? I only called to inform you all that I have decided on what to do.
Wow, so fast?
I'm so glad that you have come to a decision and hastily, son. Before you break the good news to us, I just want to remind you of the importance of family and commend you for accepting to help us out of this mess despite the short notice.
Hearing my father say all the things he said got me really pissed off, but I managed to remain calm. I never expected any real positive change, but after staying far away from them for over 3 years, I couldn't help myself from hoping. I was wrong, or do I rather say right? I realized that in everything, neither my parents nor my brother were remorseful over what had happened between us in the last few years. All they ever cared about was how to save themselves and their little company. I expected them to kick me back under the carpet at the end of everything, and somehow, that made me smile. Family? After everything that has happened in the past, don't you think it ironic that you're the one suddenly advocating for strong family ties? Listen to me carefully, all of you. Like I said, I have reached my decision. As much as I want to let you suffer, I believe the best thing to do is to leave the past behind. And so, I've decided to let my brother pay for his crimes for the first time in his life. I can't help you, and don't bother trying to reach out to me. I hung up the call and blocked their numbers immediately, as I didn't want them disturbing me again. You see, I did some digging on my family and my brother in particular, and made some interesting finds. My parents had set up a firm for my brother, and wanting to make sure he was the only one with exclusive rights as heir to all their fortunes, they'd entered some sort of amalgamation and virtually signed off things in his name. My brother was constantly abusing his wife the whole time. She endured it all until when she became pregnant and made her case known to a friend who happened to be an attorney and the fiancé of my friend who'd helped me when my family kicked me out. My friend and his fiancé advised her on what to do, and from her idea, the amalgamation was made. With that, she filed for a divorce on charges of assault. I surprised my family when I showed up and testified against my brother. My testimony was key in turning the case against them. My ex-sister-in-law was kind enough to transfer ownership on some of the assets to me. My brother bagged a jail term, and my parents were stripped of their wealth. They returned to beg for forgiveness, but I soon did a change of name as a way of letting them know that all ties between us had been severed. They never recovered and fell into poverty, and to be honest, I could not care less. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe for more stories.